and welcome back to another episode of Coffee Shop Philosophy. I'm your host, Killian, managing editor for the Being Libertarian family of publications, which includes beinglibertarian.com, think-liberty.com, rationalstandard.com, and of course, our inaugural book through Champion Books called Igniting Liberty, Voices for Freedom Around the World. As always, you can follow us on all forms of social media, including myself personally on Facebook. You can follow me by just searching Killian Hobbs Author. You can get our podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Screwed that up 3 weeks in a row, and I made sure not to do it this week. Don't worry, I didn't restart or anything like that. My guest can attribute to that, but I made a very clear point of not messing that up this week. But I digress. For this episode, I have a guest on here. I am joined today by Donald Keller. Donald, say hello to the audience.
Hello.
Hey, pleasure to have you on. Donald here is one of the authors that contributed to Igniting Liberty, as well as he runs a page, or I guess we could call it a bit of a movement that he's trying to put some effort behind here, called the Libertarian Coalition. Now, from what I've seen about it, it's a very big unity-styled project that he's pushing right now, trying to bring together a bunch of libertarian-minded people in order to push the concepts of libertarianism. That said, though, that's kind of a watered-down version that I'm able to offer. Donald, why don't you give me a bit more of a background to the audience as to what the coalition's about and what it's looking to accomplish?
Well, at the start, I'm sure everybody listening has probably met one of those people who, you tell them your beliefs and they say, oh, you're not a real libertarian. You're just a statist. And obviously, when I was new to the movement, I got a lot of that. So I decided to co-found this movement with my brother in order to kind of bring people together. And we have a lot of good authors that help out from all over the spectrum. We kind of give people our ideas, our opinions, kind of represent the different factions. And our main goal is that we're never going to agree on everything, but by emphasizing on the things we do agree on, we make the disagreement seem less big, more manageable. Because when all you know about somebody is that you don't agree with them, you tend to not want to work with them. So we want to teach people just how much they agree on stuff and how much they can work together and kind of bring together an otherwise divided movement.
No, that's definitely something that's definitely something I find is kind of lacking in the libertarian movements in general. You'll obviously have, because libertarianism is an umbrella term. I mean, even if you look at just the narrow scope that the Libertarian Party was founded on, it was just founded on classical liberals, minarchists, and anarcho-capitalists, which out of all of the spectrums of ideas that fit under what could be considered libertarianism, it's such a small percentage of the people that fit into that kind of grouping.
Yeah, and when you... I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. It's all about you.
When you look back... Well, I was going to say that when you look back then, there was even fighting. Like, they wanted the anarcho-capitalist gone, and the anarcho-capitalist wanted the other people gone. They couldn't agree on what libertarianism back then was either.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's something that, despite the existence of the Dallas Accord, it didn't really solve that question, did it?
No. If anything, we redirected it to pretty much everyone else.
It always reminds me of that. It's a stupid meme on the internet, but it always reminds me of the when you have the final opposition against actual statism, and the internet turns it into a color-coded gang war, and it shows all the different like ANCAP ball and ANCOM ball and all those, and it just cracked me right up.
Yeah, I think I saw where you showed that.
Yeah, but on the note of that, actually talking about some of these different ideas. So how do you bridge the gap between, let's go to polar extremes here. How do you bridge the gap between, say, an anarcho-capitalist that wants absolutely no state, nothing but a market system, so on and so forth, with an anarcho-communist? Because, like, I'm a moderator myself. For those that don't know, there's a debate group called ANCAP versus ANCOM debate group. I've been a mod on there for about a year or two, and I help out with some of the discussions, getting rid of some of the unnecessary comments and vitriol that gets thrown around that has nothing to do with the debate, et cetera, et cetera. But when you see the defining lines that they have there, I mean, sure, some of it's just people being mad on the internet, because that, of course, is going to be a thing. But a good chunk of the lines is even just how they define what the state is, or what the unnecessary hierarchies are, or so on and so forth. How do you bridge that gap? Like, we'll use those extremes. How do you bridge that gap?
Well, it's interesting that you ask that, because I'm sure you know a while back the Libertarian Party some of them tried to pass a resolution against the whole Ventus theft thing, and it was clear for people who know the origin of it that they were trying to kick out that group of people. And me, along with some other people, worked to try and kind of, defend the right of anarcho-communists and all of them. And because, from my perspective, if you kick them out, my group of people, the more conservatarian ones, are probably going to be next. But we did a whole thing on the coalition where we had some famous anarcho-communists and socialists come in to answer questions. And as far as bridging the gap, though, you would help them to understand what each other believes. Because right now, most of them don't know what anarcho-communists believe. And anarcho-communists, they believe that capitalism can't exist without a government. So they don't really fully understand what anarcho-capitalists believe either. A lot of it comes down to not understanding each other. But once they do, they begin to see that while their beliefs are vastly different in one area, they are largely the same where it matters. At least enough so that they can work together.
Mm-hmm. So in that case, if we're looking at this kind of, bridging the gap idea, and so what you're saying right now then is that one of the key components to this would be, of course, bridging that knowledge gap, right? So
yeah.
In that, if we're looking at bridging a knowledge gap, right? Because again, I find this is going back to, I know that more things happen in real life than they do on the internet, but I find that the internet is a wonderful microcosm for where people actually are on things, because they don't necessarily put on as much of a false bravado when it comes to their own capacities.
Yeah.
Or at least, in real life, so to speak. The internet's technically real life just because it's still the same actual humans interacting with each other. But I find that on the internet, people are more willing to say, no, I don't know this, but I'm still right. Whereas in real life, they're not as pushy necessarily on the fact that they do or do not know something, or they'll try to hide it a little bit better. Some people have probably experienced the inverse. I've seen the inverse a few times here. But what would you say is the best way to bridge that specific knowledge gap?
Well, the first thing you want to do is bridge it between the things that they agree on. Let them know, hey, did you know that this group believes this? Emphasize on what they agree on. So when you start bringing up the things that they don't agree on, these disagreements don't define the whole relationship, because the relationship is defined by a lot of things they do agree on as well. So by emphasizing there, you make the disagreements seem less big, less meaningful. And then they open themselves up to understand the other side better.
Okay. Yeah. So now this is some people obviously who've been around the movement for a while may have heard the concept before, heard the movement of bottom unity. Now, is this a same idea, separate thing, or is this in any way related to that kind of bottom unity movement? Are you familiar with the bottom unity movement before, or is this something that you might not have heard of?
Well, I'm looking it up a little bit right now.
Yeah, I believe it was a couple of people between the Audacious Caucus as well as I think there was a few people involved with the Mizy Caucus, not anyone who was actually quote unquote managing it, but just people that happened to be in there, along with some people that were without a caucus, they were just kind of floating around. And a few more notable names that were from the Libertarian Socialist Caucus. A couple of them all together had kind of tried to push this concept of bottom unity, which is very similar to what you're saying about people having to kind of bridge that gap between where they actually stand on things so that they can throw their efforts against what's seen as the actual quote unquote enemy, which would be the state, rather than, infighting amongst each other when the government continues to grow.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I was just going to say that's one of those things where I know what it is. I just don't know the name for it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's one of those things, like, I guess you have to have been like in that certain time frame where you might have come across it before, I suppose. But that was a big push item for a while. And one thing I like with your coalition idea that I think is a lot different than the original push for bottom unity was that on the bottom unity side, the idea was to ignore the differences in people's ideologies. Not so much bridging a gap, increasing knowledge, making sure people actually understand where each other's coming from, where these ideas truly lie, and having good faith arguments about it or anything like that. One of the, I guess you could say, the fatal flaws that I found with the bottom unity idea, at least in that incarnation, was that it put such a stress on ignoring what people that were supposedly banding together believed, in the idea of just creating, political weight to throw against statism. Now, on the surface, it seemed like a good idea just because, you need to have a political body in order to take political action. It's very difficult to do it solely as an individual. Even as an individual, the most impactful thing you can do is get other individuals to agree with you to start working on something. So, like, just trying to, one man against it, it's not gonna create the kind of impact that you want unless you can get people to subscribe to what you're doing. Yeah,
it'd be the same as like with the whole Occupy Wall Street movement. A lot of weight, but in the end, there was no direction.
Exactly. It was a good, decent group of people showed up, but it was a body politic without a head. There wasn't anything in the design of it that led to specific runs of action. All they had to do was wait them out, and they did, and it worked. So when we see this, when I saw this with the bottom unity movement, I actually wrote one of, I think it was number 36. I've done a handful of them now, and I can't remember the exact number. But one of the previous Bad Arguments articles that I put out every Wednesday on think-liberty.com, one of the previous ones I did was on the pros and cons of the bottom unity idea. And in the area of con, one of the issues that I had was that if we ever do successfully, displace the government or aim to elect a specific libertarian candidate, then we're going to need to have, at least to a majority degree, an alignment on what we're looking for that candidate to accomplish. I mean, it's hard to get a bunch of, say, anarcho-capitalists who already, a good chunk of them have issues with the concept of voting to begin with. And I understand those, but that's an issue for a different episode entirely. Yeah. But when it comes to getting them to vote for someone, if their candidate to vote for is the person who says, to hell with the state, also the state is any business that has ever interacted with the state, businesses and private property owners are also part of this state that I'm going to oppose, it's kind of hard to get, diehard private property supporters to vote for them, even though the idea is that they're all supposed to be libertarians. So, we've talked about trying to fix the education gap, which I definitely, I can't agree enough that the education gap in libertarianism in general definitely needs to be fixed. Where, I hate to say this to all the libertarians out there, and I'm pretty sure a bunch of them are going to tell me to go F myself, but we are not as well read or we're not more intelligent than Democrats or Republicans or undecided. We are also just people. We haven't read 10,000 books each. It's ludicrous to try to assume that we are all super geniuses when it comes to economics and politics and to try to present ourselves that way. It's good to be open to more education and to admit that we don't know everything. That all said, when people do understand what the other side stands for, and part of that stance is in direct opposition to something they would consider a core stance, like the promotion or abolishment of private property, how do you think the coalition idea can counter that?
Well, the first thing that we all need to do is recognize that we can stand hand in hand against the greater enemy on the things that we agree on. We don't have to go in guns blazing right off the bat. We can fight the smaller fights first and build ourselves up to that as we debate and kind of talk with each other more, understand each other more. We don't have to go for the killing blow right away. So it's about taking baby steps at a time, finding what you do agree on and sticking with that while still being open to discussing the things you disagree on instead of ignoring them and pretending that you don't disagree at all.
Mm-hmm. And you see, that's like I mentioned earlier, that's something that I really like with the idea that you have here, because I've seen, again, the hashtag bottom unity was a big one, but there's been other small attempts at it as well before, but almost all of them had to do with putting aside differences entirely and just ignoring their existence rather than actually having that kind of civil conversation amongst each other to kind of better understand where everyone's coming from. Because I find, and, you see this in the standard quote unquote left-right divide, right? You see this almost automatic demonization of whoever stands on the opposite side, even though the goals that people might have in mind are exactly the same. Both people might want to, say, make healthcare more affordable. They might want to lower the tax burden on the middle class to lower class. They might want to generally improve our qualities of life. It's a matter of being able to civilly discuss the prescriptions that are there. So in the mix of all this, and I know obviously you're going to say that you're just libertarian because that's kind of the point. If you had to say that you're part of a specific, I guess we'll call it a sub-school of libertarianism, which one would you say you personally subscribe to?
Well, we normally use words like faction. So if I had to say a faction, a conservatarian, because I came from pretty strict conservative position early on, and then I moved further south, so I'd be around there. So I'm moving more and more towards a classical liberal. I'm still predominantly conservatarian.
Sure. So what would, when we're talking about, libertarian conservatism, and I know there's libertarians out there that don't think that that's a thing. It is. I see a lot of it, especially up here in Canada. We see quite a bit as far as people who are libertarian, but also very conservative in their own social views. So how would you say that works when you're talking to someone who is, excessively progressive in their social views inside the libertarian community? Like, what would be your personal approach in talking to someone who holds those excessively non-conservative, take it all the way to the other side of the extreme?
Well, I do that mostly by asking them a lot of questions, and then I sit there. I spend a lot less time talking, a lot more time listening. I make sure that right off the bat they understand that I want to understand them. So I let them do all the talking at first, and then I kind of give them some of my opinions. I make sure that they know that at the end of the day, I want to understand them more than I want them to understand me.
I really like that approach. You want to understand them more then you want them to understand you. Really like that, actually. I consider that line completely stolen because IP is a steak.
I was just about to say I'm copywriting that one, but
and you see, this would be where there's a differing of opinion, and but we're still going to work together to make the rest of this podcast happen.
Yeah, as long as you pay me royalties.
That is way funnier than it has any right to be. It's been one of those days, I swear, you know. So why don't you tell me a bit more about, I guess you could say, because you mentioned, or at least you alluded to, some of the authors and the like that are behind the Libertarian Coalition page that you have here. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about, you know, who's on the team, what kind of, you know, ideas are involved behind the scenes, I suppose you could say, and then kind of tell me how that, I guess, impacts the way that you guys try to approach libertarians in general. Like, who are the names behind the names, so to speak?
Well, I guess I could start with the guy that was in the room earlier who kept wanting me to name drop him. My brother, Edwin. He doesn't like most things. Like, he doesn't like most of the people he meets on any political spectrum, because he tends to find that they're more caught up with their own beliefs than with, you know, actual discussion, and he's really into that. So he takes on the role of being our pragmatic libertarian. He tries to think of things through a more pragmatic standpoint, and he's also our mod. So he's the person that's going to use the ban him on anybody who starts calling names. So, because you know, we're kind of unique in that we have a very strict lineup of rules. You know, if you're going to have an organized group centered on debate, you've got to have those. You know, no rules, no proper debate, and that does mean we have to enforce them sometimes.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it's hard to have a civil discussion without the civility.
Yeah. But our next guy definitely is somebody who needs to get more recognition is Luke Henderson. You probably know him because he is a writer with being libertarian. Yeah,
I've had quite a few discussions with him, actually. He's really talented, both as a writer and also in the slightly newer role that he's taken on with us as well. Yeah. He's our marketing editor now, so he's been putting a lot of work into figuring things out for trying to promote the pages a little more, trying to definitely promote the book and get people's not just the book, but also get kind of the authors in the limelight, because the book wouldn't exist if it weren't for the great contributions that the authors put into it. So he's been doing wondrous work on there. Luke, if you're out there listening to this, massive thumbs up to you, buddy. He also has a personal author page on Facebook that you can follow as well if you haven't. Luke Henderson, I can't remember if he puts it as journalist and author or author and journalist. He puts it as one of the two. But if you search that, you'll find it. But definitely a great guy.
Journalist. Yeah.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah.
Definitely. He was a writer for us before he was cool, just letting you know. So, yeah, he's our class. No, I always call him the classical liberal one on accident. No, he's the monarchist one. He's our monarchist editor. And from there, we also have a man named Colin. He's our classical liberal. We have Leonardo. He was the first editor we had, actually. And he's a conservatarian too, which I like because that gives me more time to focus on memes.
You can't have liberty without memes.
Yeah,
thing.
Yeah, that's half of what I post. He covers the conservatarian stuff. I cover pretty much everything else.
Yep.
And the last person I'd like to mention is John. He's our libertarian socialist editor. And I got to tell you, over the year or so that he's been writing for us, we've seen responses to his posts go from, you gross, you have no right to exist, to a lot more civilized comments. We've really seen people warm up to him and grow more open to understanding him, especially since he emphasizes on the things that he agrees with them on. He really opens up more about that so people know, hey, I'm not the enemy. We do agree on stuff. So he's done a really great job.
Oh, that's definitely good. So, I gotta say, like, when it comes to this, we've kind of mentioned the knowledge barrier and making sure people can kind of have those good faith arguments and be able to discuss things civilly with one another, realizing that, we're all on the libertarian side. We're all trying to promote a freer society in general. But if you had to say the one thing that libertarians need to work on to really make that happen, what would, in your opinion, be the thing that we need to work on?
Definitely figuring out everybody is for the same core philosophy, understanding what that philosophy is and what way everybody agrees with it. Or are you talking about policy?
No, that's exactly the kind of thing I was talking about right there, was what libertarians themselves need to kind of work on in order to make sure that we're actually being able to band together and get things done. Because that's one of the, like I said, I got a lot of love for what you're trying to do with the movement there, because it's one of the things that's next to impossible to build up steam. Like, we see it with Republicans, we see it with Democrats, and in other countries, we see it with, like, in my country, you see the Liberal Party, Conservative Party, then the NDP, and now the Canadian People's Party. You see it in pretty much any country that has a parliamentary system, where people will band behind the party, even though the party is such an umbrella concept where reps in even just, a county over or a region over can have wildly different ideas, but still be considered part of the same grouping of ideas. And because they're a part of that grouping of ideas, they'll get the vote that actually leads to them taking office, taking the role they need to take in order to enact legislature, or in order to remove and strike down legislature that impacts our lives negatively.
Yeah. I think something a lot of people don't think about, they just think our core philosophy. But there's actually two parts to it. There's your philosophy and your worldview. Your philosophy is kind of the core of what you believe, but then your worldview is the perspective, the lens that you see that philosophy through. And that's something that we try to really focus on, because at the end of the day, libertarian socialists and libertarian anarcho-capitalists agree on the exact same philosophy. It's the worldview that's different. At the end of the day, they all agree. They all have the same philosophy. They're just seeing it through a different lens. The same as with pro-life and pro-choice libertarians. They both have the exact same core philosophy, but one believes that the unborn child is just that, and the other one believes that it's not a living human. You get that difference in a lens, you're going to interpret your philosophy differently. Mm-hmm. And it gets more complicated than that, but that's the core idea.
Yeah, there's tons of stuff on that, and we could dive into. And for those of you that haven't already, you can actually read Donald's contribution, his essay in Igniting Liberty, which was actually on the pro-life side of the debate. There was another essay in the book that's on the pro-choice side of the debate. So you can actually read both and kind of see they're both coming from a libertarian perspective, but they're taking that different worldview on the libertarian core philosophy, if you will, and it leads to these different results. And I think that it's a very interesting thing to look at, to see that kind of difference that's there and be able to expand on that and realize that if we are all technically fighting for the same core thing, then we can surely find a way to make our generalized worldviews a little more aligned so we can actually accomplish something in that space.
Yeah, I think something that people don't think about with the Republican Party is you're not the full, like, there's no Republican political alignment. There's conservative and there's alt-right and there's all of them. The Republican Party covers a spectrum. Same with the Democrats. And it's the same with libertarians. Libertarian is not a political position. It isn't the entire southern spectrum. And so we'll, it's not like these problems couldn't exist in those parties. But at the end of the day, they both know what it is they do agree on, and they hit on that, and they understand that they want the same thing at the end, and that's why they can unify. But we don't, because we are too busy saying, well, you're not a real libertarian. Well, no, they're just not the type of libertarian that you are.
Yeah. A party divided by the no true Scotsman fallacy.
Yep.
Pretty much. Well, I wanted to thank you very much for coming on the show here. Like I said, it was definitely great to talk to you about some of the ideas and the thinking behind this, the coalition concept that you have here. For those of you that are listening, you can go on Facebook there. You'll find it just by searching Libertarian Coalition. As always, of course, you can follow us on all forms of social media while you're checking them out there. You can also check out all of our pages on social media there, myself included on our author page there, Killian Hobbs Author. And as always, if you liked what you heard and you'd like to hear more, I'll see you again next week.